Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Overpowering Emotions, where I talk about all things become emotions, emotion regulation, looking at resilience in kids and teens. I've talked a lot about strategic emotion management, and there's a lot of key foundational skills all of our kiddos need to learn. We know that a lot of kids have trouble with emotion regulation. I think our whole society as a whole has trouble with emotion regulation, but definitely our kids and being able to understand emotions. And oftentimes, a lot of kids perceive negative outcomes as a very likely thing to happen, and they tend to rely on unhelpful strategies. So, emotion regulation is really where we need to focus a lot of our attention on. And that's why I talk so much about it. It's really this developmental process that's involving a progression of interconnected skills that sort of build on each other. So breathing is not enough. I talk a lot about things like breathing and yeah, we need to breathe to survive, but there's so many pieces here that we really need to make sure that our kids are building, especially in this overprotective, over monitoring world because, when I was a kid, we didn't have to talk a lot about this because we had to figure it out. We had to figure things out if we got lost on our way home, walking home from school, right? Or we're at the playground and we get stuck up on the monkey bars. I mean, there wasn't an adult always around. And so we were able to develop a lot of our self-regulation, emotion regulation skills. But the world isn't built for our kids to be resilient. And so now we're forced to build these skills. But, anyways, I'm totally digressing. Um, I think that that's just kind of a rant that if we can give our kids more opportunities for autonomy and risky play and those types of things, a lot of these skills are just going to be built naturally through play. One thing, though, when we're looking at this regulation, it always begins with relational safety and mirroring. Kids can't regulate when their nervous system isn't feeling safe enough to be able to acknowledge their feelings. So there has to be some of that emotional safety with the adults that they're working with. They need to feel heard, they need to feel understood, they need to feel safe enough to name their emotions and share that vulnerability in the first place. They also need to understand that emotions are not dangerous. Now, one of the key precursor skills that I haven't talked yet about is impulse control. And that's really the focus of today's episode, because if they've already acted out impulsively, then they can't engage in this process of emotion regulation. And I find too often we jump the gun trying to get kids to use all of these different strategies. But if the impulse control is a problem and they've already reacted, right, we're going to make really minimal progress. So when we're looking at impulse control or behavioral inhibition, it's a key part of self-control. It's essentially self-initiating without any help from others, right? They need to be able to purposefully manage their attention, their emotions, their behaviors, especially when there's an immediate temptation, immediate gratification, right? And that's clashing with maybe more important long-term objectives. So I'm really angry right now and I have the impulse to punch my friend in the face. That's clashing with the long-term goal of keeping my friends, for example. Or my daughter right now, she's trying to save up for these pair of runners that she really wants, but that money's burning a hole in her pocket. She needs to spend it now, usually on candy or something like that. That's clashing with the long-term objective of saving that money. So the rewards of exercising impulse control are often delayed and abstract, making the immediate temptation dramatically more alluring in the moment of choice. So being able to wait to go on the Xbox after I'm done studying. All of this to say they need to be able to stop and think before they act, or at least avoid reacting immediately. They need to be able to resist distractions. They need to be able to interrupt and stop themselves when an action is not very effective, right? I need to wait to get that reward. I'm not going to scream and yell and hope that somebody gives it to me because of all the screaming and yelling, which sometimes does happen. And now we've reinforced the screaming and yelling, and they're more likely to do that next time. So, really, they need to be able to prioritize the long-term consequences of behavior over immediate gratification. And that immediate gratification is I want the candy now, but it can also be I'm really angry at you and need to tell you that right now. So that's why I'm going to yell at you or punch you or whatever else is going on. So it can include really small scale things, right? Like, well, the marshmallow experiment is really good. I've talked about that before. If you haven't seen it, just YouTube marshmallow experiment where kids need to wait, right? So, dude, here's a marshmallow. And if that marshmallow is still here when I come back, then you get two marshmallows. So they need to be able to wait to choose to get two marshmallows, or I can just shove this one marshmallow in my face right now. So it could even just be on really small scales, right? Or again, the kids aren't spending all of their savings on the new video game, right? Because they're trying to save for those shoes or a bike or a first car. So it's really helping them align their actions with what's important to them, not what's important to you or other people. It's got to be something that's important to them to really develop the skill. Okay. So being able to build on that is going to be helpful so that they're not being controlled by those emotional urges all the time. So it will translate into that emotion regulation piece, but we need to be able to be purposeful and practice this. So, impulse control, when there's difficulty, those issues can really stem from so many different things. It could be related to a kiddo's temperament, how well those executive functioning skills are developed, right? Their developmental stages, the prefrontal cortex. That's what is self-regulating our thoughts, our behaviors, our emotions, all of those things. It's regulating our responses to sensory input and to emotions, and it's underdeveloped. We know when they're itty bitty. Before ages 3 and 4, it's very underdeveloped. It doesn't fully mature until really late 20s, maybe 30s. And that's neuromajority kids who don't have any diagnoses. So if there are, you know, developmental delays, that could be even more, right? And if there's specific developmental aspects that we do need to be able to consider. So we know that impulse control difficulties, like ADHD, for example, they're probably going to have other behavioral, social, emotional, academic challenges, right? So we need to be able to consider all of that. But impulsivity is really, I mean, it's more than just acting without thinking. I mean, that's definitely one type of impulsivity, but there's four distinct types that directly relate to how those emotional urges translate into problematic behaviors, and it directly affects how we tailor our support strategies based on kids' unique, their impulsivity profile. And so that's what I wanted to dig into today. So the first is urgency. So that's an inability to control strong impulses. They just have this immediate, overwhelming need to trip somebody as they're walking by or to eat that marshmallow, right? And when you look at the marshmallow, I mean, there's one little girl in the experiment who's just already eating it before the instructions are even finished, right? It's so overwhelming. There's no control. But it's just that urgent right now, I need to engage in whatever that temptation is. Emotions inherently come with action urges, right? So the goal is for kiddos to become more aware of what those urges are before they're acting on them. So, the difficulty in postponing an action when they're experiencing an urge is really hard for kids and especially our teens. We expect so much more of our teens, but they have even more. They're all executive functioning deficited, even if there isn't a diagnosis. So, when those strong emotional alarms go off, that anxious brain, I mean, it's embedded in everybody. We all, whether we have an anxiety disorder or not, we all have that anxious brain. It wants attention right now. It wants attention and a response right now. So, for example, if we have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, there's an immediate, often very overwhelming urge to engage in compulsions to reduce distress and increase certainty around an obsession, right? Even when they know that it's irrational. But for example, I have had teenagers and young adults who literally need to knock on wood so that something bad doesn't happen. Or if they've touched something that they perceive as dirty, I need to wash my hands right now. There's just that overwhelming need to be able to do that. So for this one, it's really learning to be able to create distance between that urge and the actual behavior. So we're going to substitute in an impulsive behavior. So, it could be self-injurious, maybe they're running away, maybe it's they're washing their hands. We want to replace that with a different behavior. And we want to start creating a bigger and bigger pause or space between the urge and the need to do the behavior. And this is really called riding the wave, right? We're calling it out. Here's the urge, feeling it, right? That interoceptive awareness, what's happening in our body is so important. I can feel my chest. I mean, I have this with peanut butter. When my craving for peanut butter starts to kick in, for sure 4 o'clock every day, and for sure about 8 o'clock every night, I have this overwhelming need, right? So we just need to ride that wave, drop into the body and observe what's happening. Now, for some kiddos, especially if they really do have a lot of interoceptive difficulties, and even my autistic adults, I'll just have them noting because sometimes understanding and feeling what's going on in their body can be really hard. And so it's just noting what's in their environment, whatever sensory is kind of grabbing their attention. So if I were to do it right now, and you're just naming whatever sense is coming up right now. So if I was to do it right now, it would kind of sound like this: hearing, feeling, thinking, hearing, feeling, hearing, seeing, hearing, feeling. So it'd just be like that, right? For a second, for up to 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it doesn't really matter. We just want to make sure that we're grounded and not spiraling off with, oh my gosh, okay, because we don't want to push it away. The minute I'm thinking, no, no peanut butter, no peanut butter, no peanut butter, I want to be good, no peanut butter. I mean, it's just going to become a bigger and bigger urge. Suppression does not work. We need to be able to face it and get curious with it. Okay. So that's really important. Another component when we're looking at this is a lack of premeditation. So simply, this is where we have the acting without thinking. This speaks to the automaticity and the speed with which some of those emotional responses occur, which for most kids, it's like, 0 to 60 is what a lot of adults will say. So for a lot of kids, they're just reacting so fast. And when they do, they're completely bypassing more reasoned responses. So the goal here is to slow it all down so that they can see the different components that exist, and slowing down to be able to engage that prefrontal cortex to make a deliberate, thoughtful response. So different strategies focus on different mechanisms to build self-control skills. If you look, on uh, well, social media usually has a lot of the run-of-the-mill strategies that use traditional childhood games that can tap into the urgency. We can tap into that, right? So if we just look at basic things like Simon Says, right? Red light, green light, freeze tag, those types of things, we're specifically teaching kids to pause before responding, where they have to wait a minimum of maybe 5 seconds or 10 seconds, right, before they respond or before they answer a question. Mindfulness can be really helpful in here too. So there is that piece. There's also lack of perseverance. This is a big one. These are the kiddos who are giving up really easily. Maybe they have trouble staying focused on tasks that they perceive as boring or too hard, or it's going to take too long, or I'd rather be on my iPad. This is a really big one because it directly limits kids' ability to engage in and benefit from difficult things. It could be a challenging task. It could be an exposure-based intervention that we're looking at. So we really need to be able to go here with all of this. Now, part of it is self-efficacy. That's their belief in their own capability. And that's intrinsically related to coping. And they need to be able to believe in their capacity to cope. Because if they think I can handle it, because remember, if you've heard me talk before, I talk about how anxiety is the belief something bad for sure is going to happen. It's going to be terrible and I can't handle it. So if they can learn, I can handle it. It sucks. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable, but I can handle it. Then they can learn to tolerate hard things. They can learn to do it anyway, even if they're feeling that big emotion. That's a fundamental skill to be able to build, capability, working on some of these impulses, emotion regulation, reducing some of that anxiety. But oftentimes with this one, it's a matter of maybe we're breaking tasks down. Maybe we're chaining rewards. There's also sensation seeking where kids are craving excitement, maybe. I'm not going to go into that one too much because it's not a direct impulse control deficit related to emotion regulation the same way as the other three, but that is another piece as well. So, depending on the challenge here, we need to target different things. There's not one magic bullet that's going to, get at all of the impulsive behaviors. We do need to consider, are there underlying skill deficits? So for kiddos who act without thinking and they'll do anything to escape any uncomfortable situation, they need to work on building distress tolerance. Right. And I've talked a lot about distress tolerance and being able to ride that wave. Here it is. I'm accepting it. And now I'm going to ride it out. I'm going to get curious with it. I'm really focusing on impulsivity as a result of difficulties regulating emotions. That's what I really want to focus. A lot of these kiddos experience intense emotional swings. They seem like they have very little control over those big emotions, right? Like it could be a flip of the switch. They're up and down. A lot of these kiddos might be in a constant negative emotional state where really their emotions are controlling all of their actions. So here, impulse control really is a precursor skill, but it does have some prerequisites as well. So everything that I've ever talked about this year, well, in this entire podcast, but this year, I've really been talking about emotion management, right? And a lot of these emotion regulations. So when we're looking at, if we're going to create a hierarchy of skills, the physical well-being is going to be really important to reduce emotional vulnerability. So we want to make sure we're treating any physical illnesses, we've got good nutrition with balanced meals, we're avoiding non-prescribed drugs and alcohol, we're getting enough sleep and exercise. I would put those at the top of, this part of the hierarchy for sure. So that's key. If those things aren't being addressed or they're in a really neglectful, chaotic, terrible sort of situation, I mean, they're not going to be able to work on these skills either. They're in survival mode. So we need to make sure that those pieces are there. We want to create emotional balance here too. So, how can we get them engaged in activities that create a sense of accomplishment and competence? Actively creating positive experiences. It could be, in the short term, what can you do tonight to have some fun, to have some positive experiences, but also in the long term. That's going to be really important to help build that emotional balance. If we could start thinking differently about a situation to change its emotional impact before the emotion is fully generated, that's helpful too. That's reappraisal, something that I've talked a lot about a little bit more recently as well. Acceptance, noticing our emotions, noticing what's happening in our body without attempting to alter them. That's important too. That means allowing some of those unwanted private experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, our urges to come up and just watch them. Let's just from an objective third party, observer standpoint without struggling with them. So those are important as well. Kids do have to have basic emotional awareness, just knowing that I'm starting to get frustrated, just knowing what's going on. I've really set the stage here in previous episodes, building on basic literacy around emotions, right? That's going to be important. What are they? Why do we have them? Their purpose, they are important from an evolutionary perspective. We need to have all emotions. So, what's their function? Is it to keep us safe? Right? It's our inbuilt alarm system. So being able to do all of that is going to be important. And when I'm talking about alarm system, I think it's important just to do a little sidestep as I do, just for a quick second. Teaching kids about that alarm system is really important so that they do learn emotions are important. It's not something that we want to get rid of, right? They really do serve an important function. And if you hear me talk week after week, then you know that I'm stressing this. Emotions provide such important information and they prompt action. So that goes against unhelpful strategies like suppression and avoidance, which is usually what ends up happening. They really need to understand the purpose of an emotion to be able to regulate it effectively. And so they're also learning that emotions are signals, they're not problems. That helps them reduce the stigma or shame or whatever else, other judgy things that are coming up for them or for other people. And that can help us get out of the big deal, little deal too, when we're starting to understand what is the signal here. And so that's going to really help kids get to a place of acceptance, which is another important, emotion regulation strategy here. Kids need to know how to recognize and accurately label those feelings, name it to tame it. So being able to differentiate emotions, sad versus disappointed versus tired, being able to recognize that in my body. Is it that I'm anxious or is it that I just am so dehydrated? I haven't had any water to drink today. That's really important. Those are going to be two different strategies. They need to know that self-regulation, it's about managing those thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, and that's where we are now when I'm looking at strategic emotion management. It's really involving the executive functioning processes to guide when and how I'm going to use these strategies that I need now based on whatever's going on in my environment, whatever's going on in me, whatever my emotional goals are, whatever the functional outcomes are. So they do need to understand how every emotion has an action urge or some behavior associated with it. All of our emotions affect our thoughts, affect our body signals, and our behaviors as well. So they have to understand that so that they can differentiate what's a helpful behavior and what's an unhelpful behavior. So that's why being an emotion detective, learning to observe and describe those emotions without judgment, right? Just coming from that third party perspective is really important and putting words to what they're noticing. And knowing why that's important to do is part of this too. Mindfulness, again, is important. It's boosting their self awareness of themselves in the world. It's not sitting and meditating and trying to clear their thoughts. It's just being mindful in the moment, what's going on right now. So if they're aware of, the here and now with openness, with interest, with curiosity and receptiveness, right? That's where the work is going to be done. Everything else is so much easier because all of our work is done now. And so it's really that non-judgmental observation of whatever those internal experiences are, no matter how uncomfortable or how much of an urge there is, without trying to change them, to diminish them, or anything like that. So we're really helping kids become more aware of those urges to act before they do. So that's going to help decrease some of those impulsive behaviors so that they can make some of those good decisions and do things that actually work. So, mindfulness practices that could include redirecting attention to the present moment, right? Observing our thoughts, just like clouds in the sky, right? We just watch them go by. Or if we're in the ocean, we're just riding the wave. We can't change the wave, we can't make it bigger or smaller. We probably can't swim away from it. We just got to be able to ride it, right? And experience it. So this is all really important for impulse control. And I know that it sounds overwhelming, but it's building these little blocks. Where do we need to start? And I would say probably just being aware of, okay, I can feel what's going on in my body right now. I can feel that something's going on. So it's really important for impulse control because the anxious brain, like I said, it wants that attention. The alarms are going, give me all of your attention. But we need kids to be able to learn how to respond. Now, I've done lots of previous episodes on mindfulness and actually all of these skills. So if you think that there's something that a kiddo needs to work on, you can go back and check, in YouTube, you can just search my videos based on whatever the topic is. But we really want to be able to work on things proactively. We're not waiting for them to get upset for us to say, okay, let's be mindful, let's drop into the body. We need lots of opportunities to tune into their mind and their body and remain present, even when they're calm throughout the day. So I'm always talking about these micro mindfulness moments. Drop into the body right now, right? Can you focus on your feet? What do your feet feel like? Focus on your hand. What does your right hand feel like? Now pay attention to your left hand. Which one's warmer? drop into your toes. Which foot, which toes are more tingly? I don't know, right? Maybe we're gonna focus on our feet and our toes while we're leaning forward for 3 minutes. And let's lean as far forward as we can and let's notice what's going on in our feet. So we're just encouraging them to check in the present moment. Mindfulness really is the best strategies that our kids can learn because, we interrupt the rumination where they start spiraling, right? That's their time traveling mind. And it often wanders into the future about something bad, something anxiety provoking bad is going to happen, or maybe they're going back to the past, ruminating over something that they said or did. But it's right now where they're managing their impulses and their emotions. So we can connect this to their emotional mapping to see where this is incorporated. If you're doing the body outlines and mapping where different feelings show up in their body. So, there's lots of different skills. I know I still need to dig more, but this is really an overview of some of the things specifically for impulsivity so that we can start seeing how it's actually all interconnected. Everything that I've ever talked about really comes in here. And I will be going into more specific strategies with impulsive behaviors. There's things that we can do to practice setting up temptations for them to be able to learn, hey, I don't have to follow my temptation. Even cognitive flexibility is important here. I won't be talking about that for a little bit longer. Cognitive flexibility is directly related to emotion regulation. We often think it's related to autism or ADHD, but really, when we're looking at it, it's a transdiagnostic piece that's directly related to emotion regulation. And so we need our kids to be able to think flexibly. I wish I could give you a step-by-step process because I know that there's a lot here. And I know I'm kind of going back and forth, but it's really to give you the big picture. And then we can start looking at this kiddo in this context. What are some of the skills that we need? What are some of their biggest barriers? And then you can start working on those skills because even though there's all of these pieces, you can start targeting different ones and it's all going to help with the impulsivity. So if cognitive flexibility is getting in the way, and that leads to impulsive behaviors, well, then we want to start there. We want to work with some of that flexibility. If they just can't handle the stress and they're giving up and running away, then you need to start there. So it all depends. That's why I want to give you the picture because this child is going to be different from that child, right? It's not a step-by-step process. So lots of things to think about. I will leave it there. We'll come back next week and I'll go into a couple more things and I'm going to try to look at how I can break these episodes down because I know it can be overwhelming. I apologize for that, but lots to think about. I will have some homework ideas in the show notes for you, just ideas of how to get started, even if right now it's just collecting some data so you can start seeing some of those behavioral patterns. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Help those kiddos be bold and courageous, and I will see you next time.